The NHL players certainly have their thoughts about how the playoffs should go. And even though camp is just starting, it is never too soon to talk about the NHL playoffs. We're going to get into that and so much more, all on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find the show over on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. How are we doing, Gil?
We're doing well. It's camps are opening across the league. We'll have some preseason action in a couple of days. I'm looking forward to it. It's great to have hockey back.
It is. Now, before we get into this not too early discussion about the NHL playoff format, a couple bits of news to talk about. And obviously, things may have changed since we recorded this, but Mason McTavish is still a holdout for the Anaheim Ducks. And, the guys talked about it on the Wednesday show a little bit about, what's the holdup here? Do the Ducks have a long-term prospect problem where they can't hold on to young players and they end up dealing them off other places, most notably my Philadelphia Flyers, it seems, although they got one of ours in return. So I think, all's fair in the hockey trade world, but he has started skating, Mason McTavish has, with the Ottawa 67s, his OHL team. And that is not good. I mean, that shows a commitment to the holdout, right?
It shows a commitment to the holdout and that he wants to stay in shape, right? I mean, he's doing something. I'm sure he's not going to be in a full contact scrimmage over there, but at least he's doing something. But yeah, he's digging in his heels, so to speak, and it doesn't seem like that's a good early signal. If I'm an Anaheim Ducks fan, I am not a happy camper right now.
No, I am not either, because I think obviously like losing Trevor Zegras was a big deal for them in terms of how much Zegras has been marketed as, the future of this team or a core piece of this team. Now, I understand Zegras had injury issues and I'm well aware of all of that, but still, it's been a rough road. And it seems like it's been a rough road with every single one of these prospects that finally gets to the point where they have to sign the big contract. And so I think, McTavish is obviously trying to protect his peace here in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, and I don't blame him for that. And it really, to me, there gets a point. Look, the Ducks are coming off a rebuild that took a while. And when you're in the beginning stages of a rebuild, yeah, you could say, hey, we're in a rebuild. I'm not giving out to too many players any large contracts. But if you want to get past that rebuild and start competing for the playoffs, you can't be losing all your best young players every time that their entry-level deals end and they need a new contract. So there comes a point where if you're committed to winning, you've got to pay the money to bring in quality players. And I'm just wondering if the Ducks are committed at this point.
Right. And it's a matter of, does Mason McTavish want that long-term deal, or does he want to hedge his bets because he doesn't think he can get the salary he wants and he wants an opportunity to renegotiate sooner or go elsewhere?
Yeah, but at the same time, they've had all off season to figure this out. And, you just let that whole summer slip away. And now training camp is opening up. The Ducks have a new head coach. They're running a new system. You want your best players, especially there from day one, to hit the ground running, to learn, to make it so that new system, you don't have to think about it. It just is reactionary. It's automatic. It's in your head. This is not the way to start a new era if you're the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, if they couldn't reach an agreement with him, then you got to get to a point where you move on. But you had all summer, folks. I don't get this. I really don't get this.
I don't either. So that saga continues. In the meantime, David Pagnotta, aka the fourth period, reported that there should, in theory, be a situation where Michael McLeod will sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. Obviously nothing's guaranteed. But that is what he is reporting. And that secondarily, Carolina has also checked in on Carter Hart. Many people have reported this, and there's been several teams that Carter Hart has been linked to. That is definitely not the Philadelphia Flyers, because GM Danny Briere made that abundantly clear that there isn't a future there based on everything. But for Carolina to kind of go in on two of these guys potentially, that is a risk for sure.
It is. And obviously, again, rumors, nothing etched in stone as of the time we're recording this. Elliot Friedman basically coming out and saying he doesn't think any of those players will sign with a Canadian-based team. So that limits their opportunities to a certain extent. But it's going to be interesting to see, who signs them, if anybody, and if they do, what the reception will be like from teammates, from fans, from the media. How is this going to play out?
Yeah, there's all of these important questions out there, and those are the things that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to need to weigh going into the season. And obviously, they would like to be one of those top three teams in the Metropolitan Division that get preference in the NHL playoff format here. And, they have had really successful results over the past several years in terms of the regular season to put them in that good position. It hasn't panned out for them in the long run. The conference championship is where they've maxed out at best over this run that they've had. And, obviously they're trying to, throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And I think the playoff format has not done them well in particular.
Well, look, I mean, they've gotten to the conference final a number of times. I think once you get that far, it's not the format that's the problem. But, Carolina is starting to remind me of two teams that had really good runs but never quite finished. The San Jose Sharks about 10 years ago, and then the New York Rangers in the early to mid 70s, where they made the playoffs 9 years in a row, made the cup final once, but never won the cup under Emil Francis. So, those are like teams that if you're a fan of that team, you really love them, you really respect them, but they never quite get to the all-time great level because they never win a championship.
Right. And I think that, yeah, you're right. There's no excuse in terms of once you get to the playoffs, the format is what it is, or it's been what it's been, depending on what year we're talking about, because those are two very different eras.
Yes.
That Rangers team and the Carolina Hurricanes and those San Jose Sharks, right? Three very different eras, I would say. But I do think that, the format can work to teams' advantage in terms of who they're facing. And the way that it's currently set up, obviously, as we know, that it's divisional. And so, those middle two teams are in division rivals that are going to have to then play each other again, from that 2-3 slot. Whereas, your first overall will either play somebody from the division or they won't, depending on the record of those next two wild card teams, right? Right. It's a 50-50 shot, and just kind of depending on how the regular season turns out. And I think that, the thing for me is that when you look at this format here, and, we'll get into what maybe an ideal format is, or would we change it, and what the players should have to say about it, as we move forward with this discussion. But I think that anything in sports gets stale after a while. And I think change is good. And we've seen that in recent years in the NHL with the All-Star game, right? Where they saw it just stale. It wasn't working. They did Four Nations this year as a prelude to the Olympics. Lo and behold, it was wildly successful. And now how do you go back to an All-Star game format? Well, they're thinking maybe you can't. Right. So, and that's like to me, this playoff format that we have with the in-division focus early on, that then kind of expands beyond that as you get to the conference final and Stanley Cup final, you're still kind of in that division mode for the first couple of rounds. I think there's cracks starting to form and that it's starting to feel stale.
It's starting to feel stale because you're facing the same opponents year after year. And I know, I think 99% of the LA Kings fan base is just sick and tired of seeing the Edmonton Oilers in round one of the playoffs over and over and over again. And you get to the point where, hey, we're a really good team, but we can't get out of the first round because we keep running up against this division rival who may be a little bit better. And the other thing is this, though, you really want to reward regular season success, and this format doesn't really do that enough.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of has led to some of this frustration and it feeling stale. We're going to talk about some player opinions that we heard via ESPN on this existing format, and then talk about, should the players even have a say here? We're going to do all that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Again, if your first $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Do you like player props, maybe building a same-game parlay to try to win even more, or jumping in live as the action unfolds? It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So, are you ready to play? Just download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you get $300 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com. Check it out today.
All right. So ESPN talked to some of these guys at media day around the league that they had out in Vegas, I believe. And it's interesting to me, some of these comments that we saw from different players and the ages of the players that said them and the teams that they come from in terms of who's had that playoff experience and who hasn't. So you look at a guy like Alex DeBrincat, who's, I would say, on the older side of young or the younger side of old at this point, right? And
Fair.
he's like, it's great. Everything's great. But has he played a lot of playoff games? No.
Not really. No.
So he's looking at this as an outside observer here, right? But like Victor Hedman, on the other hand, has been knee deep in the playoff experience. He's a veteran guy, and he's like, no, I want to go back to 1 through 8. We get to play the same teams every year in the wild card. I want to switch things up. And that's the stale factor from a guy who's been through it in the trenches.
Yeah, I think he's a little tired of seeing the Maple Leafs and the Panthers and the Bruins every year, although the Bruins may not be there very much right away in the future. But yeah, I mean, look, there are advantages and disadvantages to seeing the same teams. The advantage is if you get those rivalries, the Panthers and the Lightning, for example, it makes for a lot of intensity. There's bad blood between the fan bases. There's bad blood between the teams. It adds a little juice to a series. But when it happens over and over and over again, like you said, it can get stale. And then you want to see a little bit more variety. To me, the biggest thing is fairness. I want to see the teams with the best regular season records rewarded for their success, and therefore they should be playing the teams with the worst record remaining in the playoffs. I always loved when the NHL had the 1 versus 8, that they reseeded after every round. To me, That
Right.
was the right thing to do. The best remaining team should face off against the worst remaining team by record in the conference in each round, because, it has to make the regular season mean something.
Right. And I think, when you've built up those rivalries and had to play particular teams a lot during the regular season, and then you have to turn around and play them again right away in the playoffs, in some ways, there's an advantage to that, and a way that it makes it more fun, right? Because it's a little bit more intense. But in some ways, it's just exhausting, right? And it can be like, okay, we're doing this again, we're playing this team again, and to your earlier point, it feels like the reward of having a successful regular season is you shouldn't have to play those teams again that have like ground you down over the season. You should get to play a weaker team potentially from the other division.
Right. I mean, you should be rewarded for a good season by getting the easiest path to through the playoffs as possible. And on the flip side of that, if you barely make the playoffs, you should be facing the hardest path to get to the Cup Finals.
Right, and that's why I was interested to see what Cale Makar had to say, because again, the Colorado Avalanche have been more of a perennial playoff team, and they won the Stanley Cup once as part of this run, but have had somewhat disappointing exits as well as part of this run. And so I think, the Avalanche players are a good barometer of this system, in my opinion. And he says specifically, I mean, if you're from Edmonton or LA, I'd say so. Sometimes you get a good matchup, and sometimes you're playing a top 6 team with another top 6 team like we did this past year. That's the way she goes. And so he seems to be like, yeah, like, it's not great sometimes, but that's it. That is what it is. And we have to play the teams we've been dealt. And that's how you win a Stanley Cup, right? And doesn't seem interested in complaining about it. He's just going to deal with it.
Well, I mean, ultimately, regardless of the format, you've got to win. You could talk about we should have played this team first. Like, if you're the Colorado Avalanche, they opened up, you've got Vegas, you got Dallas, you got Minnesota in your division. That's 3 tough opponents. What order you face them in may not be as important as the fact that one way or the other, if you're in a divisional format, you've got to get past those teams to get to the Stanley Cup final.
Right. And that's why, contrasted up against what Cale Makar had to say, Travis Sanheim from the Flyers, who have not made the playoffs in 5 years, right? You would think, well, what does he have to say about the playoffs? Interestingly, he said about the potential for expanding the playoff to include, play-in teams or whatever, kind of like the NBA does, right? He said specifically, I don't know if you'd want necessarily more of that. It'd be exciting and bring a new element to it. But as a player, over 82 games to be a part of the top 16, that's the challenge. If you open it up, you're going to have teams that maybe don't necessarily deserve to be there. And that's a guy on a team from the outside looking in, right, saying, no, like if we don't deserve to be there, we shouldn't be there.
Look, I get it. And I fear, for lack of a better word, or I'm concerned that the NHL will go the route of the play-in system because there's money to be made. Now, we're going from 82 games to 84 games, so that's going to extend things a little while longer. And if you have that play-in round, then, you're extending the Stanley Cup playoffs even later into the year, even if you start a week or two earlier than you have in the past. I don't want to see the league go beyond 16 teams. I know they've had 16 teams in the playoffs since like 1980, give or take a year.
Yeah, even though now it's officially half of the league.
Right.
And it was more than half the league for a while. And so it feels like there are fewer teams in the playoffs just proportionally, but it's still 16, right?
Yeah, and look, I remember in the early 80s, there was a time when the NHL played an 80-game schedule to eliminate 5 teams from the playoffs, which was a joke. It was an absolute joke. And you knew who 3 of those teams were by Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. You knew, oh, this year, Quebec isn't good, or whoever, Colorado was out of it by, whoever it was, not the Avalanche. I'm talking about the Rockies.
Right.
But I mean, there were just perennial teams that weren't good enough, and you knew it from the start. But to play 80 games to eliminate 5 teams is not good. Now we're at exactly half. And I don't want to go beyond half getting into the playoffs. Now, if they expand to 36 teams down the road, maybe do you consider a play-in round? I still prefer to make the regular season more meaningful, but those dollar signs are always right in front of the owner's eyes. And I think they're going to expand it at some point.
Right. And, that's what Jordan Eberle says, right? He says, I like it the way it is. If we start expanding the league a little more to add more teams, then I think you probably got to start adding more teams to the playoffs. But I like it the way it is. I would probably go 1 through 8 instead, though. So he's like a little bit of a fine tuning there with going back to the 1 through 8, which I think a lot of us really like. But that he is really also of the opinion that until there's more teams in the league, there's no good reason to expand it. And I tend to agree with him, and he's on the veteran side as well, and now as part of his career he was the beneficiary of that in Edmonton, right? But since he has gone elsewhere, he's probably thinking a little bit differently about it. But I think that that's kind of the general veteran outlook about all of this.
Yeah, I think it's probably the majority opinion, and I agree with it. I just don't want to see, unless and even if there's just 2 more teams, I don't want to see the playoffs expanded. If they go to 36, maybe, but I like having it the way it is as far as the number of teams making the playoffs.
All right. Well, should the players even have a say in any of this, or is it just an academic discussion from their perspective? We're going to get into that and more about our ideal view of the playoffs and how it relates to the regular season, which obviously we are just getting started. We're going to do all that coming up next. All right. So when all is said and done, I think hearing from the players and what they think, it is really interesting. And again, like I said, I think looking at what younger players have to say versus older veterans and guys who have a lot of playoff experience versus guys that don't, and they all have different opinions. But ultimately, I think they're also all fans of the game. Right. And, you grow up as a fan of the game while you're trying to achieve the goal of being in the league.
No doubt about that. I want to ask you this, and I don't think the league would do it, but would you favor the ultimate reward for regular season success? Forget the conferences. Just go 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15. Travel is the reason the league probably doesn't want to do it, but that would be, in my mind, the ultimate fair system.
It was kind of like that way back, right?
It was in the 80s for a while. I do remember the Islanders opening up the playoffs against the LA Kings or the Chicago Blackhawks. Why not? Why not have the best teams make the playoffs? Travel in this day and age, it's not that big a deal, is it? I mean, I don't know.
I think in terms of the TV ratings and the revenue, I think there's something to be said for that, as well as the travel costs. But I do think, and because of the distances and the CBA, would they have to allow for extra days and would it take longer? There's some logistical barriers to it for sure. But I think it's worth having the conversation and laying out the budget and to see what it is, because I think that would be absolutely bonkers. I think you look at what the PWHL does, and the top seed gets to choose their opponent
right
in the first round as well. So, or at least they have the last 2 years. With expansion, we still don't know the playoff format, which we're going to talk about on tomorrow's show. But I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this creatively. Your suggestion you just made to go 1 through 16, is it choosing, schoolyard style, your opponent based on your regular season record, and it makes the President's Trophy worth something other than a potential curse, right?
Yeah, it really would. And I mean, like, is the East-West rivalry, does it even exist at this point? I mean, it's not like fans of the Florida Panthers are saying, yes, the Eastern Conference has won the Stanley Cup however many years.
Nobody
I don't think
cares.
anybody cares. I
No,
mean,
nobody cares. And I would say least of all the players, right?
right. So, in my mind, the logistics and the television ratings might be the only obstacle to doing the 1 through 6 versus 16.
Right. I do think having some potential other formats thrown out there to the Players Association and at least getting their input and what the vibe is based on how things have been going, and kind of look at that data and maybe use that as part of a decision-making process, along with the marketing, along with the costs, along with everything that we've discussed, and, the things that people have discussed, over the last several years. But I still very much maintain that the current format is stale and something has to give. And what that changes into, I think, the players deserve to have their voice heard about it. I don't know if it should be the final word, though.
No, look, the players play, the owners run the league, right? I mean,
Right.
there's negotiation, there's collective bargaining. Those are good things, but the players should have input, but the ultimate decision rests with the owners, considering, though, that it does have to be collectively bargained and figured out. So, but I don't think, I mean, that is one area where the players' interests and the owners' interests very closely align.
Yeah, I would say so. I would absolutely say so, because I think there should be an incentive, right? As we're entering training camp and getting ready to kick off the regular season, these are the things that the teams are thinking about, and why it's so important to get off to a good start and rack up those points early, because you want to get the right seed ultimately at the end if you're a team that's likely to make the playoffs, right? Or if you're a borderline team, like if I'm the Montreal Canadiens, for instance, this is a team that's probably going to take a big step forward this year and could be in a really good position. But if they're going to end up having to play the Florida Panthers in the first round because of the way things change, like that's going to be rough for them. And to have a different structure might be appealing.
It very well could be appealing, and it would even give them more incentive during the regular season. And that's what you want, because we all talk about the dog days in January and February where the playoff races haven't quite crystallized yet, and you're on, oh, we're playing 5 games in 7 or 8 nights, and it's a couple of back-to-backs and a road trip out west, and whatever the gauntlet is. Those dog days are not easy for the players. They're not easy for the fans sometimes. Spice it up a little bit. Make there be more incentive for regular season success and more of a penalty for regular season struggles.
I absolutely agree. And I think, yeah, that's what we're looking for here from this league, is to make things interesting, make things fun, and to switch things up a little bit. And I think the players would appreciate that too, because I think it injects a new kind of energy into the league when you make these changes, just like, again, like Four Nations did. I think, even basic things, which they did negotiate into the CBA with, like, they don't have to wear suits anymore. Well, that makes things more fun for the players too. And I think they're going to appreciate that a lot moving forward. I think the structural change from having fewer preseason games to more regular season games is going to make things more interesting as well. And I think changing the playoffs should be a part of that discussion.
Yeah, I think it should be. And look, none of this is permanent. We know that. You're always correcting the mistakes of the last format. So they'll move this to 1 versus 8 or whatever other format they pick up, or a play-in round. And then they'll say, oh, this works from this format, but this doesn't. So we'll make an adjustment. It's always evolving, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see if any changes happen before the end of Gary Bettman's tenure at the head of the NHL. It is a question I ask about a lot of things. Like, is this a Bettman thing, or is this a post-Bettman thing?
Yeah.
And I think the playoff format is one of those items for sure.
I would hope they take care of it without delay, whether Bettman stays 1 more year, 5 more years, anything in between. This is something the league should address sooner rather than later.
I agree. All right. Well, that will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Gil, you will be back on Monday to discuss the goings on around the NHL with 3 of our local hosts on the Locked On NHL channel. Like I said, I will be here tomorrow with Erica L. Ayala to discuss the PWHL and the world of women's hockey. Have a great weekend, everyone.